From the Skyloft Studios high above the streets of downtown Nashville, Tennessee, it's the Tony Vanek Show, bringing you truth, facts, and his unadulterated opinion. Now here's your host, Tony Vanek.
All right, welcome to the show. I was not going to do this particular subject. I really was undecided, and I started to really dig in deep. I spent, I don't know how much time researching this and going through it. And the deeper I went, the more obvious it was that I needed to do this this particular subject matter. So buckle up. This is probably going to be a long video, and I hope you're ready for some truth.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
So let's dive right in. So what we're going to talk about is something I stumbled upon just kind of randomly doing some research for something else that I was going to talk about. And I stumbled upon this little gem here called the Transition Integrity Project. As we go through this document is pretty disturbing. It was done back in June of I believe, this year by supposedly a bipartisan group. But as we go through and see who's involved in this, you'll realize that it's not a bipartisan group. It's pretty much the same actors as we would call the deep state actors. So as we go through this, I've got a bunch of areas that are highlighted. And the first thing we're going to do before we actually get into the document is, what is it and who's behind it? Because that's important for context. So the first name that we come to, first of all, it's the Transition Integrity Project is a bipartisan group of political operatives, academics, and former government officials formed in 2019 out of concerns around possible manipulation and disruption of the 2020 United States presidential election and transition. I guess they're feeling pretty confident that Trump's not going to win re-election. Convened by Rosa Brooks, a professor of constitutional and international law and national security at the Georgetown University Law Center. Niles Gilman, a former vice chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley, and a historian at the Berggruen Institute, which, keep in mind, the Berggruen Institute, we're going to dig into that just briefly, but it's another rabbit hole to go down, and I didn't want to dig that deep into it, but that organization is disturbing in itself. Another amongst the other members were Michael Steele, who is a former chair of the Republican National Committee, and if you research Mr. Steele, he is a typical never Trumper. He's been criticizing President Trump from day one and has been an adversary for the entire 4 years that this president has been in office. So hardly a bipartisan. John Podesta, I'm sure most of you that follow anything in politics know who John Podesta is. He was a former chief of staff for Bill Clinton, and he ran Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. And then we have journalist David Frum, which, if you look at any of his journalistic intent and integrity or lack of integrity, he's, again, another adversary of President Trump. So those are the major players here in this group. So let's start with Rosa Brooks. She is a law professor and she actually worked in the Pentagon, worked under the Secretary of Defense for policy. She's got some high level clearance, which that alone is very disturbing as we look into her background and who she really is. So if you look at her career accolades, and this stuff came right off of Wikipedia, her work history includes previous government service as a senior advisor to Assistant Secretary Harold Hung, whatever his name is. I can't pronounce those types of spellings, at the U.S. Department of State. And this was during the Obama administration. She also worked as a special counsel to the president at the Open Society Institute, which is a George Soros founded and funded foundation. So we're going to see George Soros intricately involved in this process as we go, and you'll know why I decided this was important to dig into, because it's disturbing, to say the least. So moving on, Miss Brooks was a very, very anti-Trump from the very beginning. Here's a Washington Times article that came out in February of 2017, and it states, a former Defense Department official under the Obama administration has raised the specter of a military coup to remove President Donald Trump from power. This is in February of 2017. The guy just got inaugurated. In an editorial penned for Foreign Policy, senior Pentagon policy official Rosa Brooks publicly suggested a military insurrection against the Trump administration may be the only option to oust one of the most divisive presidents in American history. How is that even possible when the guy's barely in office a month? She goes on to say, quote, Donald Trump's first week as president has made it all too clear. Yes, he is crazy as everyone feared, Mrs. Brooks wrote. So this is one of the people that dreamed up this whole thing, this whole integrity nonsense. Get some notes here. So this entire transition integrity project is her and this other guy, Niles Gilman, their little brainchild. So moving on, we have Niles Gilman, who surprisingly enough is a part of the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah. So this guy has a very interesting background. He joined the Berggruen Institute in 2017. And again, the Berggruen Institute, like I said, if you look into this institution has deep ties with China, has an entire program on transhumanism, which basically is human 2.0, trying to genetically change who we are. And that's not my opinion. That's right on the Institute's website. They have an entire human transition department that's spending millions and millions of dollars in research on how to alter our DNA, how to make us superhuman with AI, artificial intelligence, and all this other stuff. So, like I said, this is probably going to be a long video because I have to cover who's behind this so that you can see how absolutely disturbing and deceitful this entire thing is. Now, this is my opinion. I believe that this is an all-out coup on the current president to keep him from being reelected. And if he is reelected, as we see in this document, they're going to do everything they can to spark civil unrest and rioting and mayhem in the streets to try to overthrow the election. That's my opinion based on very solid facts that I'm digging up here. So here is his biography in the Berggruen Institute. He's the vice president of programs, and he's a deputy editor of Noema magazine. And if you look at that publication, it is all globalism, socialism, anti-capitalism. Just look it up. I don't have time to go through all of it. I saw it. It's there. It's all over their website. He's the vice president of programs, leads the Institute's research program. This guy is very well connected in the global network as far as world leaders, huge corporations, founders and CEOs of social media platforms. This guy has the ear of a lot of people. I didn't find as much on Mr. Niles Gilman as I did on Rosa Brooks. But as we see, if we look at who Zoe Hudson is, she's actually the director of the Transition Integrity Project. And this is a little bit of her background. But what I found very interesting as I was researching Miss Hudson is, again, another tie-in to George Soros. She was the senior policy analyst for Open Society Foundations. And Open Society Foundations is founded and funded by George Soros. And her responsibilities were for U.S. government relations on behalf of a global network of foundations, conducted major review of management and advocacy capacity across the global network. So again, these people are all about globalism. They want a one world government, a one world economy, a one world currency. They want everybody to be equal on the same playing field, no matter who you are, where you come from. Everybody, that's their utopia, except the only ones that win in globalism are the globalists, because it's like socialism. People don't win. So here is the Open Society Foundations. This is right off of their website. This is one of the factions, one of the areas that they focus their funding on and their activity. Democratic practice. So it says that Open Society Foundations support efforts to engage citizens not just in voting, but ensuring that governments respond to the challenges of the day and the needs of all their people. So if you look at their 2020 Democratic practice budget by region, you can see all the different areas that they're focusing on. And if you go down to what I have highlighted, this is what they're spending: $52.6 million in the United States to push their ideas. Where do you think $52.6 million is going? Who do you think is paying BLM to go out and be in the streets for 3 months? Who do you think is paying Antifa to be out in the streets for 3 months? Rioting, looting, hurting people, destroying property, burning down buildings, toppling down statues, attacking our police. So these are the people that are behind this 22-page Transition Integrity Project. So let's go ahead and go through this a little bit. So in June 2020, the Transition Integrity Project convened a bipartisan group of over 100 current and former senior government campaign leaders and other experts in a series of 2020 election crisis scenario planning exercises. Basically, they did 4 scenarios, and I didn't include those scenarios into this video because it was just too much information. But I will leave a link to where, if you're interested in seeing what the scenarios were, you can go on and take a look, and it spells it all out pretty well. So the areas that I have highlighted here. The closest analogy may be the election of 1876. Yeah, 1876, and that's key. And I'm going to dig in. We're going to have a little history lesson. I'm going to explain to you why they're bringing up the election of 1876 and why it's so important. A time of extreme partisanship and rampant disenfranchisement where multiple states proffered competing slates of electors, and the election was only resolved through a grand political bargain days before inauguration, one that traded an end to Reconstruction for electoral peace and resulted in a century of Jim Crow, leaving deep wounds that are far from healed today. Now, I find it extremely comical and not at all surprising that they would bring this up, because the Democratic Party is absolutely masters at gaslighting. Because if you actually know history, and this is what we're going to get into a little history lesson, the election of 1876 was during the Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era was very impactful in gaining rights and independence for the former slaves who were freed from slavery due to Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln was assassinated, now Lincoln was a Republican. Although the Democrats love to hold Lincoln up like he's one of them, he wasn't. He was a Republican. The person that was one of them took over the presidency when Lincoln was assassinated, and that was Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat. He was Lincoln's vice president. So he assumed the presidency after Lincoln's assassination, and for a myriad of reasons, historians consider him and regard Johnson as one of the worst presidents in American history. And I'm going to explain a little bit why. So as soon as he was inaugurated, he started to reverse what Lincoln had done for the slaves in the South. There were a majority of Southern states that were run by Democrats, and the Democrats were doing everything they could to try to hold on to their slave trade one way or another. So what Johnson did was he enacted something called black codes, and you can look it up. And what that did was that literally put blacks back into bondage, and it limited them on the amount of income they could make, and they had to sign employment contracts with whoever they were working for, and they weren't allowed to own property. So the Democrats were really trying to keep blacks in line, and Johnson was instrumental in that. So Johnson runs through his term, and enter Ulysses S. Grant, and he's elected in 1869. He goes and continues with Lincoln's Reconstruction because he's a Republican and he cares about the blacks, and he's trying to continue Lincoln's legacy to help the former slaves with equality. He also used federal troops to enforce constitutional equality for blacks in those specific southern states. So they actually had federal troops occupying these certain southern states where the Democrats were kind of running amok under Johnson, and Grant sent troops in there to kind of knock heads and say, you're going to follow the rules or we're going to smack you around until you do. So that's what was going on under Ulysses S. Grant. During that time, under his presidency, they passed the 15th Amendment, which prohibited states from restricting voting rights due to race. And then he launched an offensive, a military offensive, against the Ku Klux Klan and destroyed them. They were all Democrats. And that was back in 1871. So there's your little history lesson. So why a person of color would align themselves with the Democratic Party, if they knew the history of the Democratic Party, they would run the other way, because nothing's changed. And they can't tell me that it has, because they show themselves. All right, so getting back to this, now that we covered some history for you, let's get back into this article here. So the other part I have here, and you're only on page 1. It's 22 pages. I don't have all 22 pages on here, but bear with me. We'll get through this. I'm going to try to go through this as quick as possible. So the second part here that I have highlighted, the concept of election night is no longer accurate and indeed is dangerous. The winner may not, and we assess likely will not be known on election night, as officials count mail-in ballots. Now, this is very important. This is a very strategic play that the Democrats have launched with this whole mail-in ballot nonsense, this whole mass, I can't even say mail-in ballot because it's not, it's a mail-out. It's a mass mail-out ballot. They're going to mail everybody who's a registered voter, whether you're dead, alive, if you're living in the same area or not, if you've moved 5 times, they're just going to do a mass mail-out. There's no checks and balances there. I keep hearing the argument about, well, we've been doing mail-in voting for decades with absentee ballots. There's a huge difference between an absentee ballot and mass mail-out ballots. There is a specific procedure that you as a voter must follow to request an absentee ballot. If you don't follow these specific rules and procedures, you don't get it. If you get it and you don't follow the process properly to mail it in, it nullifies your vote. It's very specific. You have to prove who you are when you're requesting the ballot. As an individual, you're requesting them to mail you that ballot. You get the ballot, you fill it out, you put it back in the envelope, and you mail it back. When you're doing mass mail-out ballots, one person could get 6 ballots. You could be getting ballots at your house for the people that lived there before. And there's no way for anybody to know if you just fill it out and send it in. I also saw some videos, I don't know how accurate they are, I didn't research it, that some of the mail-out ballots that they sent to some of the people in the primaries, there was a barcode and some lettering on it, and one was designated with an R if you were a registered Republican, and one was designated with a D if you were a Democrat, and it was on the outside of the envelope so that anybody that could look at it and be like, oh, that's a Republican vote, that's a Democrat vote. We're going to toss this one and we're going to toss that one, whatever. I don't know how factual that is. I haven't researched that, but that was a little disturbing. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Getting back to the mail-in ballots, this period of uncertainty provides opportunities for an unscrupulous candidate to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the process and to set up an unprecedented assault on the outcome. Campaigns, parties, the press, and the public must be educated to adjust expectations starting immediately. So they're already putting it out there that, oh, we're not going to know who won the election on the night of the election. We're not even going to know the next day. We might not even know for weeks. So just put that in, just prepare for that. That's BS. Anyway, I digress. Plan for a contested election. So they're setting the stage already. If there is a crisis, events will unfold quickly and sleep-deprived leaders will be asked to make consequential decisions quickly. Thinking through options now will help to ensure better decisions. So they're planning their options already. Approach this as a political battle, not just a legal battle. In the event of electoral contestation, sustained political mobilization will likely be crucial for ensuring transition integrity. Dedicated staff and resources need to be in place at least through the end of January. Then it goes on to say, address the 2 biggest threats head on, lies about voter fraud and escalating violence. So they're already trying to build the narrative that there's no such thing as voter fraud, that Trump is just out of his mind, when all you have to do is a simple Google search, or I'd rather say DuckDuckGo because I don't use Google. And you can see currently there is ongoing fraud cases and ballot tampering cases just in the last primary elections that we had, and a nightmare of scenarios and situations with the mail-out ballots that they tried to do. And that was on a very extremely small scale. And they're finding tens of thousands of ballots that are uncounted in dumpsters, or they weren't filled out properly, and they're trying to say that there's no voter fraud. And it goes on to say, voting fraud is virtually non-existent, but Trump lies about it to create a narrative designed to politically mobilize his base and to create the basis for contesting the results should he lose. The potential for violent conflict is high, particularly since Trump encourages his supporters to take up arms. Is that a bunch of crock of crap or what? That right there boils my blood. When I'm sitting here watching cities burning, people dying, innocent people getting gunned down in the streets that just happened last night, it's infuriating for them to suggest that our president is trying to incite his base to go out and cause violence when the Democratic Party has not once denounced what's going on out in the streets right now. They're actually encouraging it, and they continue to encourage it. Anticipate a rocky administrative transition. What are they transitioning to? Because they already think they're going to win. because they're planning on fixing this thing to make sure that they, one way or another, they're going to get Trump out of office. That's what this whole thing is about. Defend against Trump's reckless actions on his way out of office. So again, it's disturbing, to say the least. It's disturbing. This little area here, they talk about the Transition Integrity Project and who was involved and what it's about, and it's a bunch of BS. As far as I'm concerned, as I'm reading through this, it's a whole lot of propaganda and basically a manifesto to unseat the president. The goal of TIP is to highlight these various electoral and transition-related risks and make recommendations to all actors, individual and institutional, who share a commitment to democracy and the rule of law. And if you look at this document, there's a little number 2 at the end of the word law to designate a footnote, and we're going to get to that footnote here in a minute because this is extremely interesting and extremely important to know where these people are in their belief system. The recommendations shared here reflect input from both Republicans and Democrats committed to these values. Basically, they're the deep state actors that are wanting to oust this president because he's pretty much calling them on the carpet and he's clearing out the swamp, and they don't like it. So let's go to that footnote at the bottom. TIP recognizes and shares the view that the Electoral College is profoundly anti-democratic and that numerous long-standing practices also function to create structural biases in our voting system. For present purposes, however, these constraints are treated as givens. So let me let you in on a little tidbit here. If these people get power, they're going to abolish the Electoral College and essentially put us into mob rule. And that's what they're pushing for. They don't like the Electoral College because it's fair, because it works. So this section here I've got highlighted. 67 people participated as active players in one or more of the scenario exercises, while dozens more participated in the exercises as observers and offered feedback during debriefing sessions. Participants included members of both major political parties. Again, this is not bipartisan. These are never Trumper Republicans. These are anti-American Republicans. That's who these people are. These are people that do not function in our government for the people. They function in our government for their sole purpose. Former high-ranking government officials, including, for example, 2 former governors, senior political campaigners, nationally prominent journalists and communications professionals, social movement leaders, and experts on politics, national security, democratic reform, election law, and media. So they basically had a whole group of deep state actors running through scenarios on how they were going to take over the White House, basically. Each simulation exercise involved 7 teams, each composed of 2 to 3 people. The teams were constructed to allow players considerable flexibility to adopt different identities at different points in the game. Using a matrix game format, the teams were the Trump campaign, the Biden campaign, Republican elected officials, Democratic elected officials, career federal government employees and political appointees, media, right-wing, left-wing, and mainstream, which I find that hard to believe, and the public. The team consisted of polling experts, the public. They were the polling experts. Teams were made up of participants with real-life experience in the types of roles they were asked to play. Under the rules of the Matrix game, teams presented with the initial scenario could take any action they wanted. The chances of success of each team action were determined based on robust argumentation among all teams and the adjudication of a white cell, as well as a randomizing factor based on dice rolls. So basically, they're trying to determine the outcome of our personal life here in America by rolling dice. That's comical. It is important to note that the exercises were not designed to model or simulate legal strategy, but rather to better understand the potential political mobilization and media dynamics surrounding potential electoral contestation and how candidates might exercise political power to achieve a win. It goes on to list some key insights from the scenario exercises, and I find this extremely entertaining. The president deployed agents from Homeland Security to Portland to suppress racial justice protesters. Yeah, they were just protesters, a move that outraged many, including the Republican former head of Homeland Security, and indicates President Trump's appetite to deploy federal agents even against the will of local elected officials. Again, as I said earlier, nothing but a bunch of BS and propaganda, because if anybody has a lick of sense, audience, they would realize if they looked at what actions were actually taken, what Trump actually did was well within the constitutional confines of his presidency. And he sent officials, federal officials, U.S. Marshals, to protect federal property. They were threatening to burn down a federal courthouse. So it's absolutely within the right of the president to protect federal property. And that's what he did. And these people attacked the federal officers, and they were protecting themselves. That's what really happened. So that being said, moving on. As we get down into this other section here, and again, we're up to page 5, so bear with me. Like I said, it's going to be a long video. Campaign decisions about whether to contest the election are likely to be political calculations rather than calculations based on legal rules alone. So again, it shows you that they don't care if it's legal. They're going to use any political means, any political pressure, power, gimmicks, tricks that they can use to get into the White House, to get Trump out. Election lawyers use the term margin of litigation to describe the range of reported vote tallies that would provoke legal action. Thinking about the upcoming presidential election, the more important concept might be the margin of contestation. In other words, what combination of factors might lead a candidate to conclude that contesting the election is or is not in his interest? This is a dynamic and unpredictable calculation because the outcome is likely to be fought not only in court or by counting ballots, but possibly also in state legislatures, in Congress, and on the streets. That's frightening. During the exercises, winning the narrative emerged as a potentially decisive factor. So if you think that all of this stuff that Trump has been saying about the fake news, the fake news, the fake news, he knows what's going on. He understands how powerful the mainstream media is at manipulating what people believe to be truth. And they're saying it right here. They're putting it right here in black and white. And I had the pleasure of highlighting it for you. So what happens before Election Day will, to a large extent, determine the margin of contestation. Reporters, pollsters, pundits, political parties, and many others will communicate confidence or concern about the legitimacy of the election. Viral social media memes will play a role as well. So let me make a prediction. If by some crazy, fantastical chance that Joe Biden has a decided lead over Trump, they're going to push the narrative that everything's fine. Everything's running smooth. Everything's accurate. There's no fraud. There's nothing going on behind the scenes. Everything's cool. But if Trump is winning, especially if he's winning by a large margin, get ready for hell to be unleashed, because that's what they're talking about. During the exercises, winning the narrative emerged as potentially decisive factor. Either side can expand or contract the margin of contestation. If they succeed in substantially changing how key decision makers and the public view the facts, in quotations, the facts, because they like to manipulate what they like to call the facts, the risks of action or inaction or external events such as civil unrest. So they're setting the scene here. We're already seeing what they're planning. I highlighted this because I thought it was absolutely incredible. I thought it was just laughable. Team Trump often had the advantage because they could rely on Fox News, a significant and committed base, and loyalties from law enforcement agencies. Now, I don't know if any of you have watched Fox News lately. I don't have cable, so I don't watch it too often, but I do get streamed sometimes, and there's more Democrat nonsense and BS coming out of Fox News than I've ever seen before. You've got Juan Williams on there talking out of his bunghole half the time, and Donna Brazile, who should be in jail. I don't even know what she's doing on there. So anyway, I digress. Getting down in here a little bit deeper, Team Trump also encouraged chaos and violence in the streets and aimed to provoke Team Biden into subverting norms, even as Team Trump itself sabotaged traditional norms so that Team Biden could be accused of hypocrisy or illegality. So they're saying that in their exercise, these little puppet masters that were playing in their roles were being evil little Trumpsters and doing all kinds of deceitful, evil things to poor Team Biden. That's how they played this out. At the bottom here, relying on both Fox News and right-wing social media, which pretty much is non-existent anymore because they keep getting canceled and banned. And I just saw the Hodge twins, their Facebook page just got deleted. They had 6 million followers. Their Facebook page got unpublished. I love those guys. to echo and amplify pro-Trump messages and facilitate the harassment and bullying of election officials, to cause chaos and delay and or intimidate officials into taking actions that benefit Team Trump. This is all the fun little games that they were playing to see how they can manipulate the election. Biden's strategic assets include Democratic governors and secretaries of state in swing states, notably in North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So you people out there that are watching that are in North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and you're planning on voting for Trump, go to the poll and vote. Don't mail your vote in. Don't fall into that trap. Go and vote. Better yet, volunteer to work at the polls. If you have the time and you can get out there and be a poll worker and keep an eye on what's going on. Because the more people we have out in the streets, at the polls, keeping an eye on the integrity of what's going on, if we show up in force, we're going to be a lot better off. And personally, I think Trump's going to win by a landslide. I don't even think it's a competition. And I don't feel like I'm being biased. I do a lot of research and do a lot of reading, and I don't think the Democrats have a chance. A broadly shared sense in the Democratic Party that current voting systems as well as the Electoral College are structurally anti-democratic, and a widespread and deeply held desire on the part of Democrats nationwide to move on from the chaos of the Trump administration. So Team Biden and the Democrats during this exercise, I highlighted a couple of things in here that I thought were interesting. They took the following steps. They are organizing 1,000 influencers to denounce efforts to steal the election. So basically, they're looking at getting anybody who's in the public eye, Hollywood people, sports figures, social media, to say that Trump is doing something fraudulent and cast doubt on the election. Organizing all living presidents to stand with Biden and denounce Trump administration efforts to subvert the democratic process. How he's going to subvert the democratic process, I have no idea. When was the last time you saw past presidents stand up against a sitting president? I don't think I've ever seen that. I certainly have never seen anything as atrocious as what I see coming out of Barack Obama and how disgraceful that person is, and his anti-American rhetoric is nauseating. But again, I digress. That's my opinion. Some participants in the exercise observed that if former Vice President Biden wins the popular vote but loses the Electoral College, there will be political pressure from the Democratic Party's rank and file and from independent grassroots organizations to prevent a second Trump term. So basically, they're going to try to go against the Constitution because the popular vote doesn't win the election, the electoral vote does. That's the Constitution. These people don't believe in the Constitution. They just think it's an old ratty piece of paper with a bunch of words on it. They don't care about it. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They care about power, money, prestige. That's all they care about. Going back down into the middle of this page, the president and key members of his administration can also, this is good. This is good. Talk about gaslighting. Tell me if this doesn't sound like a blast from the past administration. The president and key members of his administration can also reference classified documents without releasing them, manipulate classified information, or selectively release classified documents for political purposes, fueling manufactured rumors. Russia hoax? Maybe? Sound familiar? These people are amazing. The election also demonstrated that there is considerable room to use foreign interference. All right, so Joe's going to be using some Russian bots on Facebook, I guess. Real or invented? Again, cue the Russia hoax, as a pretext to cast doubt on the election results, or more generally, to create uncertainty about the legitimacy of the election. Now, please understand, folks, I'm reading this from their document. I didn't write this. I didn't make this up. I couldn't make this up. This stuff is better than fiction, man. This is mind-boggling. I sat here for hours reading through this and combing through this, and I had to keep putting it down because I'm like, this can't be real. Again, here we go. A show of numbers in the streets and actions in the streets may be decisive factors in determining what the public perceives as a just and legitimate outcome. Can you say dry run? Look around what's going on. This BLM nonsense, all this stuff with Antifa. Is this not just a trial run to see how the public is going to respond? Are they going to be for the rioters or against the rioters? Are they going to do what we think they're going to do, or are they going to do something different? This is all scripted. The whole thing is scripted. Team Biden almost always called for and relied on mass protests to demonstrate the public's commitment to a legitimate outcome. There it is, people, right there in black and white, with the objective of hardening the resolve of Democratic elected officials to fight and take action and to dramatize the stakes. I'm starting to get really annoyed. I've read through this several times, and each time I read through it, my blood boils just a little bit more. My face gets a little flush. I feel like screaming, but let's continue, because I'm sure you've got a whole lot of other things to do than sit here and listen to me yammer. In the middle of the page here, it says, of note here, TIP's scenario exercise suggests that President Trump and his more fervent supporters have every incentive to try to turn peaceful pro-Biden protests violent in order to generate evidence that a Democratic victory is tantamount to mob rule. In the recent past, President Trump has on numerous occasions called on Second Amendment people to defend their rights and has called on his supporters to liberate states with restrictive COVID-19 related rules. Did any of you hear that? Did any of you pick up on Trump telling us that we need to arm ourselves and march the streets of our towns in protest of COVID-19 rules? I don't remember ever hearing that. I'm pretty pro-Second Amendment, extremely pro-Second Amendment. I think I would remember that. Again, a bunch of BS propaganda, and I'm really sick of it. Let's go down to this section. This is pretty funny. Take the money and run. Participants in the scenario exercise universally believe that self-preservation for President Trump and his family will be Trump's first and possibly only priority if he is forced to concede electoral defeat. Some of the things that they're figuring he's going to do: negotiate business deals with foreign countries. Gee, I'm kind of thinking that sounds like Joe Biden. Maybe that's me. Purge documents that might incriminate foreign governments and business partners. That kind of sounds like the Obama administration and Secretary Clinton. But again, maybe it's just me. The next thing that they say that he's going to do is pardon everyone. Pardon everyone. This is awesome. All right, so moving along here. Wag the dog, spark a foreign adventure. There was quite a bit of speculation that Trump might himself initiate a foreign crisis shortly after the election or during the transition, perhaps to change the media narrative around a contested election, attempt to rally nationalist feelings to himself, or placate foreign leaders to whom he may feel beholden, such as Vladimir Putin. There's the Russia connection again. These people are incorrigible. Moving on. In a debrief, one participant expressed concern that Attorney General Barr could launch a bogus investigation into terrorist ties of the Biden transition team in order to justify surveillance and or facilitate a false flag operation before the election or when the election is still being contested. Where did I hear that scenario before? Oh, the Democrats did that when Trump got elected. So I guess that they think since they did it, he's capable of doing the same dirty, underhanded crap that they do. That's the way they think, because they're evil. Okay. In one instance, Team Biden's strategy, in anticipation of an ultimate loss, which they should be anticipating that right now, was to strengthen its hand in order to negotiate a package of structural reforms to the democratic system. This is where, as I said in the beginning, the election of 1876, this is where this comes in, because this is what they're planning. If all else fails and Biden loses by a landslide, and they're going to go in there pounding their fists and screaming, and they're going to try to contest the election, they can't walk away empty-handed. They're going to try this maneuver that happened in 1876. The difference between what they think is going to happen here and what actually happened in 1876 is Hayes won the Electoral College by one vote. One. Here's what they're proposing. They want to include making D.C. and Puerto Rico states, abolishing the Electoral College, I said earlier that that's what their plan was, and requiring Supreme Court justices to retire at 70. Gee, I wonder why they want that. I guarantee you if they were in power and they had a bunch of liberal Supreme Court justices, they would be just fine with the lifetime appointment. These people annoy the crap out of me. Okay, so here's the recommendations to avoid a crisis. This is where you really need to pay attention because this is the plan. This is what they foresee coming down the road in the next few months. Plan for a contested election. There will likely not be an election night this year. Unprecedented numbers of voters are expected to use mail-in ballots. Now you see why this COVID-19 was so important. I'm not saying that the virus was a hoax. I actually had it. I didn't die, unless maybe I did, and I'm just broadcasting this from heaven. I don't know. But I know people who've had it. I know people who were very sick from it. I don't know anybody personally that had died from it, but the people that I know, friends of friends, that have had relatives die from COVID-19, they did not die from COVID-19. The virus did not kill them. They died from underlying conditions that their immune system was compromised, and that's what they ultimately expired from. Anyway, now you know why this whole shelter in place, quarantine, shut down businesses was so important. Because they don't want people to go vote. They want people to mail in their vote. Why would they want people to mail in their vote? Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. After everything that we've read up to this point, do you trust these people? Okay, so the mass use of mail-in ballots is what they're saying, which will almost certainly delay the certified results for days or weeks. A delay, and this is the key, a delay provides a window for campaigns, the media, and others to cast doubt on the integrity of the process and for escalating tensions between competing camps. As a legal matter, a candidate unwilling to concede can contest the election into January. Okay? Planners need to take seriously the notion that this may well be a street fight, not a legal battle. Again, with the fighting in the streets. Technocratic solutions, courts, and a reliance on elites observing norms are not the answer here. Dedicated staff and resources need to be in place at least through the end of January. Then it goes on to say at the bottom here, state actors, particularly those in swing states, should ask, what are specific political incentives for certain actions in the post-electoral period in their state? So they're already trying to figure out who they can bribe. Does that not say that? Am I reading into it too far? What are specific political incentives for certain actions in the post-electoral period in their state? Sounds like a bribe to me. What is the risk that the state legislature or the governor would certify a result at odds with the popular vote? Again, sounds pretty underhanded. What are the risks that a complete count would be thwarted? What is the history of hate crimes and other acts of targeted violence? Who are the key influencers in the media and among local activists who can affect political perceptions and mobilize political action? Can they be approached and briefed on these issues now to establish pre-commitments to playing a constructive role in the event of a contested election? These people are planning a coup. These elitists, these deep state, trying to keep this family friendly, these deep state players, these globalists, they are doing everything within their power and the power of the people that they have at their disposal to disrupt this election. This isn't disruption from a foreign government. This is disruption from foreigners like George Soros infiltrating our political process, paying for people to come up with this stuff. These institutions that these people are tied to are worth billions of dollars. They funnel billions of dollars a year through these organizations into democratic platforms, into BLM, into Antifa. So don't think that this is not serious, because this is serious. Groups, coalitions, and networks should be preparing now to establish the necessary communications and organizing infrastructure to support mass mobilization. Did anybody see the pictures on social media of the BLM buses lined up at the truck stop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, off of Interstate 595? I used to live down in that area. I know exactly where that is. And they actually had pictures of tour buses. And these are expensive tour buses. They're not cheap. They're probably $500,750,000, if not $1 million each. And there were a whole line of these, and some of them actually were black and had BLM logos on them. Who's paying for that? These people are paying for it. Wake up, folks. This is serious. If there is a crisis, almost every strategy to protect the democratic process is dependent on mass mobilization, and in particular, on people taking peacefully to the streets in large numbers. What is that going to do? What is that going to do other than to create an absolute pressure cooker for violence and people getting hurt? But they don't care. They don't care about people. I'm getting agitated. Trying to get through this. I've had to stop the video several times. Just to catch my breath because I'm getting worked up. And in particular, on people taking peacefully to the streets in large numbers, potentially for an extended period. Large base building groups on the progressive side will need to anchor this strategy. So they need funding, they need encampments, they need buses. It's already in place, folks. They're already doing it. But their success will likely depend on supporting and resourcing new and emerging racial justice leaders, many of whom are not affiliated with formal institutions and coalitions. Folks, we are going to have an army of radicals coming out in force. So please, please be prepared for this. Moving on, name the elephant in the room. President Trump is not running a normal re-election campaign. What does that even mean? It goes on to explain it here, but I'm not going to get into it because it's a bunch of nonsense. But again, they reference this deployment of Homeland Security people. In July, the Department of Homeland Security deployed federal agents to Portland, Oregon under questionable legal authority and against the will of local officials. Again, the reason that they did that was to protect federal property. They didn't need to get the permission of local authorities because the local authorities don't take care of federal property. The federal government does. Concretely, at both the state and federal level, partisan actors, including President Trump himself, may seek to deploy law enforcement, National Guard troops, and potentially active duty military under the Insurrection Act. Have we not been hearing that term all for the last few weeks or the last 3 months? To restore order in a manner that primarily benefits one candidate or to participate in efforts that interrupt the process to count ballots. Journalists and independent watchdogs can begin to cultivate sources and research stories now so that they are positioned to sound the alarm should actors inside or outside of government attempt to discredit the legitimate results of the election. So moving on, again, they say they want to address the two biggest threats head on, the lies about voter fraud and escalating violence, which we already know, as I said earlier, there's documented cases of voter fraud as of recently in this last primary. Again, they go to say, despite overwhelming evidence that voting fraud is extremely rare, falsely claiming fraud is a common tactic to undermine voter confidence in election results. Gee, wasn't it the Democrats that cried voter fraud during the Bush-Gore election? I'm pretty sure it was the Democrats. I could be wrong. Anyway, it goes on to say, and Trump is using it already. And rightly so, because he knows that there's stuff going on that is not right. Another significant concern is that if both Trump and Biden supporters take to the streets, it will increase the risk of violent conflict, particularly since President Trump has repeatedly encouraged his supporters to take up arms. Well, guess what, folks? If I've got an angry mob and they're approaching me or they're approaching my residence and I feel like my property or my safety or the safety of my family is in jeopardy, you better damn well be skippy that I'm going to be firing some rounds to protect myself because that's my right and the government can't take it away. The government can only enforce it. That's what the government is for, not to take your rights away, but to enforce the God-given rights that we have. Again, I'm getting fired up here. Foreign intelligence operations are also likely to attempt to stoke domestic discord. Extremists can use social media platforms and communication tools like Facebook Messenger to quickly and broadly disseminate lies and to organize people to take extreme action. You know what? We don't need Facebook media platforms because CNN and MSNBC and all these other news agencies, they do just fine with all this BS propaganda. They don't need Facebook. People just watch CNN. It says that, that they've already seen it. They've seen it through hoaxes aimed at encouraging armed right-wing activists to assemble against non-existent threats. These people are just full of themselves here. Peaceful protests will need specialized training on de-escalation and nonviolent techniques and on how to document the nonviolent nature of their protests, given the likelihood that agitators will attempt to blame any violence on them. So this is where I guarantee you, and I've already seen it out in different platforms, that these BLM and Antifa people are putting a call out to have people dress up in pro-Trump garb and pro-police garb and go out and raise hell. So they're already planning this. Then it goes on to say, anticipate a rocky administrative transition. So again, they're already pretty much putting a mark in the win column for the Biden campaign. Congressional leaders and lawyers need to anticipate that Trump will make strategic use of pardons to thwart future criminal prosecution, arrange business deals with foreign governments that benefit President Trump and his family, attempt to bribe and silence associates, declassify sensitive documents, and attempt to divert federal funds to Trump's businesses. These people are absolutely scared out of their minds. I'm not sure what's going on with all the child sex trafficking. That's one of the areas that I've been doing a lot of research in. I'm not quite finished. I will be doing a show on that as well as a few other topics that I've been researching. But this just jumped out at me, and I had to do it. Okay, here's another thing that really fired me up. This frankly pissed me off. Will Trumpism survive a Trump loss? While it is not squarely in the scope of TIP's investigation, almost all of the debriefings included some discussion about whether Trumpism is likely to survive Trump after he leaves office. President Trump has cultivated and mobilized a significant base. Many believe it won't easily be demobilized after Trump leaves office. Trumpiness, whatever that is, Trumpiness, is built in now, said one participant. There are immediate implications for an incoming administration. And then they bring in QAnon, which is supposed to be a conspiracy. QAnon doesn't exist. It's some kind of just right-wing conspiracy thing. But they bring it up here, so pay attention because it's important. QAnon could play a role in electing far-right candidates to Congress, providing an anchor for ex-President Trump's proposals. We're almost done. There was near universal agreement that in the event of a Trump loss, the GOP strategy will be to create trouble for the incoming Biden administration in order to regain ground in 2022 and retake the White House in 2024. These people are so power hungry that they're projecting and gaslighting all the things that they've already done to previous administrations, current administrations, that they're expecting that their opponent is going to fight as dirty as they have been fighting. It's disgusting. It's absolutely outright disgusting how these people think. There was no agreement among participants in the scenario planning exercises about what specific action should be taken with regard to pursuing investigations and possible charges against President Trump and members of his administration. What are they going to charge him with? They've already tried to impeach him. They've gone through several hoaxes between the Russia hoax and the Ukrainian hoax and a lot. I've honestly lost track. There's been so many of them. And it's all a bunch of BS. More broadly, there needs to be a robust, intentional, and specific strategy to challenge the white supremacists and extremist networks that enabled Trump's rise to power and were in turn enabled by Trump's administration. Folks, when have you ever heard Donald Trump patronize white supremacy? When have you ever heard Donald Trump push a radical right-wing white supremacist agenda? Never. Let me say it one more time. Never. So for all you liberals out there that happen to be watching this, and I pray you are, because you need to wake up, because these people, they don't care about you. If you vote Democrat, you're signing your own death warrant. That's the God's honest truth. You go to the poll and you vote for Joe Biden and you vote blue across the board, you're signing your own death warrant. You're signing your own family's death warrant. These people are evil. These people will stop at nothing to regain power, and they will stop at nothing to take over this country and turn us into a globalistic socialist utopia where they can just have their way. And if you think I'm crazy, sorry, not sorry, because I'm not crazy. I've been reading through this stuff and researching this for days, and I was very reluctant in putting this out because I don't like putting a target on my back. But you know what, folks? It's time. The war is at your door. The war is at your door. What are you going to do? Are you going to stand up and fight, or are you going to crawl in the corner and hope that the bad guy goes away? The bad guy's not going away. You better be willing to stand up and fight for what you believe in. You better be willing to stand up and fight for your family, because this is serious. Hey, I hate to get that dramatic, but I truly feel that we are in a situation like never before in our lifetime. We need to rise up as a people. We need to be praying, fervently praying. Thank you so much for joining me. Click the like button. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. This is actually the first video for the Tony Vanek Show. So click the like button, subscribe, click on the bell so that you get notified for the next video. If you're watching this on the website, you can actually go to the show notes tab, and I'll have links to all of the reference material that I've used to put this together, so that you can kind of go through and look for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I'm not the end all be all here. I just do a lot of research, and I don't speak until I actually know what I'm talking about. You can actually go on, I will leave a link to these documents. You can download the PDF and look through all the scenarios that I left out because I just don't have enough time. This video is already going well over an hour. But look for yourself if you care to. If you care to. If there's a topic that you would like to see me cover, that you would like to see me investigate, reach out, send me a message. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Parler, at Tony Vanek on Twitter, same as Parler. I'm on Facebook. I hope you're well. May God bless you. May God bless your family. May God bless the President of the United States, and may God bless the United States of America. Have a wonderful day.